Okay, so let's start with a super quick revision of the next chapter, that is tax invoices, credit notes and debit notes. Simple chapter, small chapter, procedural chapter. Let's start with it. First of all, whatever section number, section 31, 32, 33, etc., whatever section numbers are mentioned in this particular chapter that pertains to the CGST Act. Yes. Now, in this particular chapter, first thing that we need to study is about tax invoice. Okay, the document that we are going to issue if we are making any taxable supply of goods or services. If we are making any taxable supply of goods or services, then in that case we need to issue the tax invoice. If we are making any exempt supply of goods or services, or if we are a composition scheme dealer, then in that case we are not required to issue a tax invoice. We will be issuing a document called as bill of supply, right? Then we had some definitions here which we are going to deal as and when we are going to start with it. So yes, again, whenever we are doing any taxable supply of goods or services, the document that we are required to issue is a tax invoice. For tax invoice, there is no separate, there is no specific format that is given, but there are certain mandatory fields. Okay, date, then the serial number, that is the invoice number, HSN, and all those things which should be mandatorily written in the invoice, which is given there in our summary table also. Then we have already studied in our time of supply chapter the time period within which the invoice in case of supply of goods or invoice in case of supply of services must be issued. Okay, in case of supply of goods, whenever it involves movement of goods, the tax invoice should be issued on or before the goods are removed from our premises. Okay, but when it does not involve movement of goods, it should be issued on or before the delivery or before the goods are made available to the recipient. On or before that day, the invoice should be issued. In case of continuous supply of goods, there are two ways. Either when we are issuing the periodical statement to the recipient, or whenever we are receiving periodical payments on or before that particular date, we have to issue the invoice. Whenever the goods are sent on approval basis or sale or approval basis, etc., then in that case, first of all, if you are able to sell it, well and good. As soon as you sell it, on the same day the tax invoice should be issued. If you are not able to sell it within a time period of 6 months from the date of removal from your premises, or if you have not brought it back to your premises within a time period of 6 months from the date of removal, then at the end of 6 months, we are required to issue an invoice and tax becomes payable on such goods. Okay, so basically in case of goods or goods sent or taken on approval or return basis, then the invoice should be issued at the time of supply when it is sold properly, or if it is not sold within a time period of 6 months, or it is not brought back within a time period of 6 months, then as soon as those 6 months period expire, you are required to issue the tax invoice. But ma'am, whenever we are sending the goods on approval, etc., there is going to be a movement of goods. Now, yes, we are sending the goods and we are not selling the goods. So sending the goods can happen under delivery challan also. Okay, similarly, when the goods are sent outside India for exhibition purpose, okay, you never know that whether it will be sold or not. So it is not considered as a supply. If it is not considered as a supply, you are not required to issue tax invoice there itself. So at that time, again, same 6 months provisions will apply. That is, if you are able to sell it within 6 months, then at the time of supply, the invoice needs to be issued. If you are not able to sell within a time period of 6 months, or if you have not brought back within a time period of 6 months, then as soon as that 6 months period expire, the invoice needs to be issued in such a case, right? Then after that, time limit for issuance of invoice in case of services. What will happen in case of services? Normally, whenever we are providing any services, tax invoice should be issued before the provision of service, before providing the service, or within a time period of 30 days from the date of provision of service. But in case of a banking company, insurance company, etc., instead of 30 days, they will get a time period of 45 days. Then in case whenever there is any services, any taxable services, taxable supply of services which are provided between distinct persons, in case of same banking, insurance, NBFC, telecom companies, etc., then in such cases, invoice should be issued before or at the time of recording of such transaction in the books of accounts, or before the expiry of the quarter during which the supply was made. Then in case of continuous supply of services, let's say if there is any particular service which is going to be provided for a period of more than 3 months, in case of continuous supply of services, if the due date is known, then on or before the due date. If the due date is not known, on or before the receipt of payment for that services, or when the event or when the payment is linked to some event, that is, if this is completed, we will receive this much payment, then on or before the completion of that particular event, within this much time, the tax invoice should be raised, right? Then suppose if before completion of the supply, there is a cessation of supply. Okay, there is a cessation of supply. That is, the supply has got abrupted in between. Okay, it has got broke in between. Then in that case, as soon as the supply ceases, at that time, whatever proportionate work has been done for that amount, the invoice should be issued immediately, right? Then after that, there are some contents. Okay, there are some contents which should be specifically mentioned in the tax invoice. I have made a consolidated table for the same. Can you see this? Yes, this is the summary table. Actually, this is the format. This is the format which can be which can be referred for contents of tax invoice, revised tax invoice, bill of supply, and all these things. So for tax invoice, all these pointers, okay, for tax invoice, whatever tick I have put, all these points should be mentioned. One important point which I would like to tell you here is, suppose if the recipient is a registered person, the person to whom we are supplying the goods, okay, if that person is a registered person, his name, address, GST number should be mentioned. But if that person is an unregistered person, and if the value of goods supplied is more than or equal to 50,000, then in that case, name, address with state name should be present in that particular invoice. Okay, but what if the value is less than rupees 50,000? If it is less than rupees 50,000, then in that case, it is not necessary to put all these details, that is name, state, etc. in the invoice. But if the recipient asks for it, then we will have to put all those things in the invoice. Okay, but in case of, let's say, a supply of online gaming services or supply of OIDR services, etc., when they are providing from outside India to an unregistered person here in India, then we are not supposed to check the value. Then the name of the recipient as well as the state should be compulsorily written in the invoice. Okay, then after that, the next requirement was the number of HSN. Okay, HSN should also be written in the invoice. In case of HSN, one thing is very, very important here is, ma'am, how many digits of HSN should be written in the invoice? So if the aggregate turnover in the preceding financial year, if it is less than or equal to rupees 5 crore, okay, if the aggregate turnover is less than or equal to 5 crore, small person, then for B2B supply, 4 digits is mandatory. For B2C, nothing is mandatory. Even if you don't write the HSN, it is okay. Okay, it is optional totally. But if your aggregate turnover is more than rupees 5 crore, then in that case, for any type of supply, be it B2B supply, be it B2C supply, full 6-digit HSN should be written in the invoice. Are you clear with this? Yes. Then the next one, how do we issue the invoices? So invoices in case of goods are issued in 3 copies. Original one is for the recipient so that he can claim the ITC. Okay, duplicate one is for the transporter for transporting the goods from one place to another, and third copy, triplicate copy is for the supplier, the third copy. Okay, but in case of services, there is nothing called as transporter involved. So original one will go to the recipient and the duplicate one will be for the supplier. Right? Acha, whenever we are issuing any invoice in case of export of goods or services, it can be done by 2 ways. Either we would have paid the IGST, okay, or we have not paid the taxes and we have, under the bond or letter of undertaking, we have exported the goods. So whichever method you have followed, either if you have paid the IGST, then mention it on the invoice that this export is done by payment of IGST. If IGST is not paid and if you have done the exports under bond or letter of undertaking, then mention it on the invoice that IGST was not paid. Right? Then section number 31A says that facility for doing digital payments to the customer should be provided. Means whenever we are selling the goods to the other person should be given the facility to make digital payments to the recipient. Okay, that was a different section altogether. Now coming on to different types of documents. Now the first document that we have already studied was about the tax invoice. Okay, second type of document which is coming up here is revised tax invoice. Okay, we had studied in the registration chapter that suppose if Suppose if you become liable for registration on a particular day, then within a time period of 30 days, if you go and apply for registration, then means you have done it on time. Then in that case, the day from which you were liable for registration, your registration will become effective from that day itself. Okay, means retrospectively your registration is becoming applicable. So can we say the day when your registration, when you became liable for registration, till the day you are granted the registration certificate, okay, during those particular number of days, you would have already issued some invoices and you did not charge any tax on that because till that time you were unregistered. But now your registration is being made applicable with a retrospective effect. So you can issue the revised tax invoices. For which period? Can you put it in a statement form? Revised tax invoices can be issued from the date of effective date of registration till the date of grant of registration. This can be issued. You can collect GST from the other person, and the other person can also get the input tax credit on the basis of revised tax invoices. And this revised tax invoices should be issued within a time period of 1 month from the date of grant of registration certificate, right? Then after that, the next thing is, yes, now can we say in case there will be, if the period is let's say about 20 days, 25 days, 30 days, there will be many tax invoices which would have been issued. So all the tax invoices can be revised now. Yes, so now they are telling that you can issue consolidated, okay, consolidated revised tax invoices for all the supplies made to unregistered person. See, if you have made the supply to registered person, then obviously for each supply you will have to issue a separate revised tax invoice. But if you have made the supply to unregistered persons, okay, then in that case you can issue a consolidated revised tax invoices, but provided the value does not exceed 2.5 lakhs, okay, in case of interstate supply. So now how will we bifurcate it? In case of supply done to registered person, consolidated concept is not at all applicable. In case of unregistered person, consolidated one is applicable. In case of unregistered one also, if it is an interstate supply where the value does not exceed 2.5 lakh for one full state, for all the unregistered applicants taken together, you can issue a consolidated revised tax invoice. But if the value is more than, for each taxable value, if it is more than, I'm talking about interstate only, if it is more than 2.5 lakhs, then recipient wise you will have to issue. But for intrastate, okay, intrastate irrespective of the value, you will have to issue recipient wise revised tax invoices. Are you clear with this? Yes. Then after that, ma'am, what will come in this revised tax invoices? You can refer it from that summary table. One extra thing that will come in this revised tax invoice is the reference of the original tax invoice, right? Acha, one more exception that has been given here is suppose if you have done a supply whose value is less than rupees 200, okay, and if the supply has been done to an unregistered person, does not need a tax invoice, then in that case no need to issue a tax invoice, okay, provided value is less than 200, supply is done to an unregistered person and he does not require a tax invoice, then in that case no need to issue a tax invoice. So for all these supplies done during a day, at the end of the day you can issue a consolidated tax invoice for the same, right? Then after that, then this was all about your tax invoices. Now going on to the next document, that is bill of supply. Whenever you are supplying any exempted goods or services or both, or if you are a composition scheme dealer, then you cannot issue a tax invoice, you will have to issue a bill of supply. And suppose if you are a composition scheme dealer, you will have to write in that bill of supply that you are a person who has opted for, you are a composition taxable person not eligible to collect tax on the supplies. Right? Okay. Then after that, yes. Now suppose if you are doing taxable supplies, you were required to issue tax invoice. If you are doing exempt goods or services supply, you are required to issue bill of supply. Okay. What if you are doing both? What if you are doing the taxable supply also as well as exempted supply? Then you will issue a common document called as invoice cum bill of supply. You need not issue it separately. Okay, now listen, what if you have received any advance payment? Okay, what if you have received any advance payment for goods supplied or to be supplied or services to be supplied? Then yes, you can definitely accept the advance. Why not? Okay, once you accept the advance, you will have to issue a document called as receipt voucher. Okay, a document called as receipt voucher, where it will be written how much amount of advance has been received, etc. Then do you recollect, in case of time of supply chapter, we had studied that whenever we receive advance on goods, the time of supply does not get attracted at that time, it was exempted. Okay, but when you receive advance in case of services, you have to pay GST at the time of receipt of advance also. Okay, now listen, what if I have promised that I am going to provide you some service later on for which you have paid me an advance? Okay, so as of now, I will issue you the receipt voucher. Okay, but now can I say I will be required to pay the tax now itself because it is in case of services? So in that case, let's say I'm providing multiple services of different rates. Okay, so I don't know which service are you going to avail from me. So as of now, I will pay the tax assuming at the rate of 18%. Okay, now the service that you can take from me can be an interstate supply also, that can be an intrastate supply also. So as of now, I will assume it to be interstate supply and I will pay the taxes to the government. Right, now listen, imagine you had given me the advance, so I gave you a document called as receipt voucher. Now later on the contract got cancelled or I did not provide you any services, etc., and now I am supposed to refund back the money to you. Okay, if I am required to refund back the money to you, since there is no supply, there will be no invoice that will be issued. So in that case, I will be issuing a document called as refund voucher, that I have refunded you so and so amount. Are you clear with this? Yes. Now, next thing is in case of reverse charge mechanism. Okay, in case of reverse charge mechanism, let's say if I am the supplier, okay, if I am the supplier, I am supplying the goods to you. Okay, and where the recipient is liable to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism, then in that case, okay, I am an unregistered person. Example, unregistered GTA who is providing the GTA services to a registered person who is required to pay tax under reverse charge mechanism. Then in that case, you are going to directly pay the taxes to the government, right? You are required to make an invoice just for yourself. Okay, you are a registered person, I am an unregistered person, I cannot give you the invoice at all. So you will be required to prepare an invoice for yourself, and you will be required, you will be making the payment to me for the value of goods. You will not pay the taxes to me, but you will pay the value of service, value of goods to me. For that, you will be issuing a document called as payment voucher, that you have done payment to me of so and so amount, right? Then after that, the next one, there are some people, okay, there are some notified persons who are exempted from issuing tax invoices. Instead of tax invoices, they can issue any other document instead of the tax invoice. Okay, example, insurance company, banking company, financial institution, including NBFC, they can issue any document in lieu of the tax invoice, which should have some mandatory information. Okay, it should have it is not mandatory for them to have the serial number and address of the recipient, but other details of tax invoice is mandatorily to be presented in that particular document. And for all the supplies done during a month, the bank, insurance company, etc., they can issue me a consolidated statement at the end of every month. Okay, next person who is exempted here is GTA who is providing the services for transportation of goods by road in a goods carriage. In such case, again, tax invoice is not mandatory, but if he issues me a document which has the gross weight of the consignment, then the name of the consignor and the consignee, the details of the vehicle through which the goods are transported, then the place of origin till the place of destination, all these things, if it is present in that document, then it will be considered as if it is a proper tax invoice only. Right? Then the next one, third point, supplier of passenger transportation services. Okay, if someone is providing me passenger transport services, then in that case, a ticket is provided. Yes, that will be considered as if it is the tax invoice. Serial number, address of the recipient, etc. is totally not required. And the last one, that is if someone is providing me, okay, a registered person is providing me the service of exhibiting of, your cinematograph films in a multiplex screens, your normal movie theaters, etc. Again, they are not issuing me any tax invoices, they just issue me a electronic ticket, and that ticket itself is considered as the tax invoice, right? Okay, so this was all about your different documents. Now a few more, something called as delivery challan. Okay, now delivery challan is a document by which help us in transportation of goods from one place to another without issue of invoice. Means where invoice is not available, still you can use the delivery challan for transportation of goods from one place to another. In which cases, okay, now delivery challan is generally used in those cases where you are not selling the goods but you are sending the goods. Okay, example, when I am sending the goods where the quantity of supply is not known, okay, or when I am sending the goods to my job worker, or when I am sending the goods for sale or return basis, or any other case where it is not leading to sale, where it is not leading to supply, then in that case delivery challan will be issued. Yes, in that delivery challan again, delivery challan will be issued at the time of removal of goods for transportation, and it will include a serial number. Okay, what all things will be written in the delivery challan? Right from the top, date will be written. Okay, date of issue will be written, number of delivery challan will be written, consignor consignee details will be written, HSN will be written, description of goods will be written, place of supply will be written, quantity, taxable value, tax rate, and signature. Okay, basic details will be mentioned in this delivery challan. Again, delivery challan will be for goods only, it will not be for services. So 3 copies, original for the consignee, duplicate for the transporter, and triplicate for the consignor. Are you clear with this? Yes. Then after that, then we will study ahead in the next chapter that sometimes for some persons, okay, whenever you are transporting the goods from one place to another, at that time along with delivery challan, e-way bill is also required. Okay, so the details of delivery challan should also be mentioned in case of should also be mentioned in the e-way bill. Corresponding details should be mentioned in the other document also. Acha. Now let's say you have transported the goods from one place to another and now it is resulting into supply. So as soon as it is resulting into supply, you will have to issue an invoice for the same. Similarly, when the goods are transported in semi-knockdown condition or completely knockdown condition, or in batches or in lots. Okay, let's say I am sending you the goods in lots. Then in that case, I, supplier, will prepare the invoice for the total quantity today itself. Okay, when I am dispatching the first lot, at that time itself, I will make the tax invoice for the total quantity. Okay, but I will not issue you the original invoice. Okay, I will issue you the copy of delivery challan and I will issue you the certified copy of the invoice. Okay, so ma'am, when will you give me the original invoice? You will get the original invoice only when you receive the last lot of goods. Do you recollect we had studied this in the ITC chapter also, that supplier is required to pay the GST at the time of sending the first lot of goods, but the recipient will get the ITC when he receives the last lot. Okay, so same corresponding thing has come up here. Then after that, in case of ISD, we had studied tax invoice in case of input service distributor, that whenever the ISD is distributing the credit to its other offices, at that time ISD invoice is required, of which the content is given here. And similarly, if there is a particular branch which is situated in the same place as that of your ISD, and if branch is giving some credit back to the head office, then in that case again it will require to issue an invoice for which the details, for which the content is given here. Not very important, just one time read, okay, for that ISD thing. Then they are telling us here is the person who is transporting the goods, or we can say the transporter, is required to have the copy of tax invoice or bill of supply with him at the time of transporting the goods from one place to another. Suppose if it is done without invoice, means we are just sending the goods, at that time delivery challan and e-way bill as required should be there with the transporter. Basically, there should be some documentary evidence available with the transporter also while transporting the goods from one place to another. Right, then going on to the next concept, which is talking about your credit and debit notes. Okay, first of all, both of these documents, credit note and debit note, both of these can be issued only by the supplier. Okay, just keep that in mind, it is issued only by the supplier of the goods. When is the supplier required to issue the credit note? Whenever, see, credit note means we are crediting the account of the debtor, means less amount is now receivable from him. Okay, so now whenever we have charged more value of goods from him than actual, or we have charged higher rate from him than the actual amount, or whenever there is a sales return, or whenever he has not liked the quality of the goods and now he is requesting us to reduce the value, in such cases the supplier can issue a document called as credit note. Okay, credit note will be issued by the supplier. Then after, for multiple invoices, we can issue a consolidated credit note also. So ma'am, when will debit note be issued? Opposite. Okay, whenever, see, already at the time of making the sales, we had debited the account of the debtor. Now we are debiting it more, means we have charged less amount of value of goods, or we have charged lesser amount of tax from him, or whenever, yes, in such cases, or whenever we have charged lesser rate of tax from him, then in that cases, now we are going to charge more from him. If we are going to charge more, then we have to debit his account. That's why we are going to issue a document called as debit. Okay, yes, one important point is in case of secondary discounts. Okay, we have already studied this in the valuation chapter, I think, that if secondary discounts are offered by the supplier to the recipient, then because of that, the tax liability cannot be reduced. Okay, so for secondary discounts, the credit notes cannot be issued. Then we had studied some time period. What is the time period for declaring the credit note and debit note in the return? So credit note should be declared in the GST returns. Okay, it should be declared in the GST return in the same month in which the credit note was issued, but not later than 30th November, whenever the supply was done. From that year end, after that, whichever 30th November will come, that is 30th November of the succeeding financial year of the supply, or before filing the annual return, whichever is earlier. Before this particular date, the credit note should be disclosed in the GST return. If credit note is not disclosed in the GST return, then in that case, it will not affect your tax liability. Okay, then your tax liability will not get reduced. Okay, similarly, even debit notes should be disclosed in your return. There is no time limit for issuing the debit note. Debit note can be issued at any point of time, but there is a time limit applicable for disclosing the debit note in the GST return. That is, debit note should be disclosed in the return in the same month when the debit note was issued. So whenever we are issuing the debit note to the recipient, in that same month's return, we have to disclose that debit note, because in case of debit note, your liability is increasing, so you have to disclose it in the GST returns. Right now, this is the summary table. Okay, I have taken all the pointers from each of the answer, which talks about contents. Okay, what all things should be there in the tax invoice, what all things should be there in the revised tax invoice, and all those things. One time read, not relevant from exam point of view. Okay, but contents of delivery challan you have to remember, which I have not included in this particular table. Contents of delivery challan, that should be remembered compulsorily. Right, next two small sections, section number 32 and section number 33. Section 32 is talking about unauthorized collection of tax. Who can collect tax? Which supplier can collect the tax from the recipient? Only a registered supplier, a person who has registered himself under GST, can collect the taxes in the name of GST from the other person. Means unregistered person who is not at all liable, who has not even taken any registration, that person cannot collect any GST from the other person. And next section is section number 33, which says that whatever amount, suppose if you are a registered person and if you are collecting GST from the other person and you are issuing the tax invoice to the other person, in that tax invoice, the tax amount should be indicated separately. Okay, it should not be like total amount including GST is mentioned. No, that is not allowed. Basic amount plus GST should be mentioned separately. Right, then going on to the next concept, that is about e-invoicing. Okay, e-invoicing concept was introduced for such registered persons whose aggregate turnover in any of the preceding financial years from 2017-18, in any one of the year, if it has exceeded rupees 5 crore. Okay, this is the updated limit. Earlier it was 10 crore. Now it is, if your aggregate turnover in any one of the preceding financial year from 2017-18 has exceeded rupees 5 crore, then in respect of B2B invoices, okay, in respect of B2B supply and in case of export, only in these two cases. See, export is done to an unregistered person, so those are normally considered as B2C, but for the purpose of e-invoicing provision are applicable for exports also. So whenever we are doing any supply to B2B and whenever we are doing any export supply, at that time we are required to issue e-invoice, that is mandatory. Okay, now there is a normal phenomena that we assume that e-invoices are prepared on the government portal. That is not correct. Okay, e-invoicing is prepared in your own accounting software. Okay, whatever software you are using, in that you are going to prepare the e-invoice, or in that you are going to normally prepare the invoice. Okay, then that is exported in the JSON format, JSON format, it is exported. Okay, then you go to the invoice registration portals. Okay, government has created 10 such websites, E-invoice 1, E-invoice 2. Government has created 10 such portal. You go to that particular portal, you import your data from JSON. Okay, if it is validated, if all your data is correct, then the invoice registration portal, basically that particular website, it will validate your data. It will give you a number called as invoice reference number, IRN, 64-digit character hash is generated. Then that document is digitally signed by the GST department, and it will give you a QR code. Okay, and it will give you a QR code, and then this particular entire document, okay, this particular entire document will be called as your e-invoice. Okay, but this entire procedure is applicable for whom? This is applicable only for those entities whose aggregate turnover has exceeded 5 crore in any one of the preceding financial year, and only for B2B and export they are required to do this e-invoicing. Okay, now ma'am, what is the purpose of doing all these things? See, if you are a business entity whose aggregate turnover is more than 5 crore, means you are definitely doing a considerable amount of business. So once you create an e-invoice, immediately on the portal, in GSTR 1, which is your sales return, in that it will be recorded as your sales. It will also be recorded in your GSTR 3B, in which you show your outward supply as well as inward supply. Okay, and then it will also get reflected in the other person's recipient's GSTR 2B. Okay, where the other person is going to get the credit. So can we say creation of fake invoices, taking of fake ITCs, etc. All these provisions are totally ruled out. Right? Then after that, yes, now some person, now whatever we have studied here, these persons were required to mandatorily issue the e-invoice in two cases. Okay, one was in the case of B2B and the other one was in the case of exports. Okay, similarly, if there is, imagine that case of unregistered person making a supply, or say registered person making a supply to another registered person, but the recipient was liable to pay the tax under reverse charge mechanism. If a registered person is making a supply to the other person, then in that case, even though tax is payable by the other person under RCM, I will be required to issue e-invoice. I will not be exempted from the requirements of e-invoice. I just have to check one requirement. The one requirement that I have to check is whether my aggregate turnover has exceeded rupees 5 crore in any one of the preceding financial year. Okay, but ISD, if he is issuing invoices to his office of distribution of credit, e-invoicing is not applicable. Okay, similarly, importer, okay, let's say we are importing goods from the other country, then that person, to him the e-invoicing provisions are not applicable. Okay, similarly, unregistered person making a supply, e-invoicing provision is not applicable because he is not at all registered. Okay, but let's say there is a government entity, there was an amendment point, yes, there is a government department, local authority, government PSUs, government agencies, etc., who registered themselves under GST only for the purpose of deducting TDS. So they were liable for compulsory registration. Even they will be responsible for e-invoicing if that aggregate threshold limit of 5 crore rupees is exceeded. Are you understanding this? Yes. And then some other persons, okay, some other persons are also, 6 persons are also exempted from the requirement of e-invoicing. Okay, 4 persons remaining the same who were not required to issue tax invoice. Banking, insurance, NBFC. Okay, then after that GTA, then passenger transport service, this your multiplex screens, cinematograph films, exhibition. These 4 persons, SEZ unit and not SEZ developer. Okay, and last one was any government department or a local authority. Okay, government department and a local authority. If these 6 persons are providing services, okay, if they are the supplier, not services, if they are the supplier of any goods or services, then they are totally exempted from the requirements of e-invoicing. Okay, just remember here it is SEZ unit and not SEZ developer. Okay, and all these persons which we are studying here in the list, these are not the recipient. Okay, they are the supplier. So what if I am a normal person and I am supplying something to SEZ unit? Then in that case, e-invoicing will be applicable. But what if SEZ unit is supplying something? Then in that case, e-invoicing is not applicable, right? So can there be a possibility that there is a bank whose turnover is more than 5 crore? Is it required to issue e-invoice? Banking company whose aggregate turnover is more than 5 crore in preceding financial year. Okay, as per threshold, yes, but as per exemption, no. So in this case, banking company is not required to issue any e-invoice because it is specifically exempted, and it will have to write, okay, it will have to write in its invoice that even though it will have to give a declaration that even though its aggregate turnover exceeds rupees 5 crore for issue of e-invoice, still it is totally exempted from the requirement of e-invoicing, right? Acha. Then after that, I told you when this e-invoice is generated, there will be a QR code also. Okay, so if any officer wants to check the particulars of that e-invoice, he can simply scan it from that QR code and he will get all the details about the e-invoice there. Okay, can this e-invoice be amended or can it be cancelled? Yes, it can be done, but only before it is checked by any officer. Once it is checked, okay, once your e-way bill is active, okay, because from your same e-invoice, e-way bill is also generated. Okay, but if your e-way bill is active or once it is checked by any particular officer, then in that case it cannot be cancelled. Otherwise it can be cancelled, but while filing the GSTR1, means while filing your return, GST return, at that time it can be altered or it can be changed or cancelled, right? Then I had told you the reference of 10 websites, that is the invoice registration portal where you can go and import your JSON data, etc. Those are these invoices. Then your 64-digit number is generated, that is nothing but your invoice reference number, right? Acha. Now once you scan that QR code, what all information is contained in that QR code or what all information the officer will get after scanning the QR code? Okay, what all information? GST number of both. See, e-invoice is there now, so it is applicable only for B2B. So GST details of both of them will be available. Invoice number will be available. Details of goods, HSN, everything, all those information, IRN number, etc. All those details can be checked from that just by scanning the QR code. Right? And then going on to the last concept, which was talking about dynamic QR code. Okay, dynamic QR code. Now what are they trying? This is totally different from e-invoicing. Okay, e-invoicing was applicable only for B2B exports, etc. Now here they are telling that if there is any registered person, okay, if there is any registered person whose aggregate turnover has exceeded 500 crore, okay, it is more than 500 crore in any one of the preceding financial year from 17-18 onwards, then in such a case, such registered person, in respect of its B2C supplies only in case of B2C supplies, except exports, it is mandatory for such registered persons to print a dynamic QR code, to generate and to print a dynamic QR code on the invoice which is issued by such registered persons. Can we say these are very big registered persons because their aggregate turnover has exceeded 500 crore in any one of the preceding financial year? So whatever invoice they are printing, on such invoice they are required to print a dynamic QR code. Ma'am, what will happen because of this dynamic QR code? If you scan that particular dynamic QR code, you will be directly allowed to make the digital payments. Okay, you are not even required to feed the amount. The amount will be auto-feeded by scanning that QR code, and you will be directly, directed to GPay or any other modes of making the payment. Okay, you must have seen static QR code. Okay, whenever we go for this grocery shopping or any vegetable vendor, etc., there is a QR code stand which is put or QR code sticker that is put. Okay, if you scan that, you have to manually put the amount in it takes you to GPay or it takes you to Paytm or PhonePe, etc. But there you have to put the amount. Okay, that QR code is called a static QR code where you are manually feeding the amount. Okay, but here they are talking about what? Here they are talking about dynamic QR code where once you scan it, the amount will be auto-feeded. You must have seen this in case of DMart, in case of Star Bazaar, etc. When you scan that QR code, the amount of your invoice is already put into that. Okay, the system immediately generates that dynamic QR code, and once you scan that, the payment can be done. So for B2C invoices, it is mandatory to print the dynamic QR code on the invoice. Okay, sometimes it so happens that first you make the payment and then the invoice is generated. So they show you the dynamic QR code on that POS machine. Okay, on that swipe machine, etc. itself, they show you the QR code, you scan from there and then the invoice is generated. If they have shown you the dynamic QR code earlier, okay, and the reference of your payment details, the acknowledgement number, mode of payment, if that is mentioned in the in the invoice, then on the invoice it is not mandatory to print the dynamic QR code. Okay, so by default provision is dynamic QR code should be present on the invoice. Okay, but sometimes it so happens that they show you the QR code in advance on the POS machine and then the invoice is generated. So you have already made the payment using that dynamic QR code. So dynamic QR code again is not required to be printed on the invoice. Okay, then there are some suppliers. Even if their aggregate turnover has exceeded 500 crores, they are not required to comply the requirements of dynamic QR code. 4 persons remaining the same: banking, insurance, NBFC, GTN, passenger transport service, multiplex, and last one is any person supplying OIDR service. He is supplying from outside India. Okay, so he is not required to print any dynamic QR code on the invoice. And similarly, in case of exports, when we are exporting any particular goods, in that case, we are not required to put the QR code, because anyway, the other person will not be able to make the payment by scanning that dynamic QR code. Okay, so dynamic QR code will contain what all information? It will contain the supplier. See, your recipient is unregistered. So it will contain the supplier's GST number. It will contain the supplier's UPI ID or his bank account details. It will contain the total amount payable. It will contain the invoice number, invoice date, GST amount, breakup, etc. All these data are already contained in that dynamic QR code. Okay, by default provision is dynamic QR code should be presented where? It should be printed on the invoice. Okay, but practically sometimes it can so happen that the customer wants to make the payment in cash, or the customer wants to make the payment by debit card, credit card. Then in that case, the customer is not at all willing to use the dynamic QR code. If he is not willing to use the dynamic QR code, then in such a case, even if in that case he can make the payment by other modes. Okay, by whatever mode he has made the payment, that mode should be mentioned in the invoice, and then it will be assumed as if you have complied with the provisions of dynamic QR code, and it is not required to print the dynamic QR code on the invoice. Okay, because the customer has chosen for another option. Similarly, if the supplier provides him other payment method like UPI collect, UPI intend, or similar modes, or any computer app, mobile applications or computer based applications for making the payment. Okay, and dynamic QR code is not displayed by us to him, to the customer, then in that case, customer will do the payment using those other modes. Okay, but in the invoice, we are required to display the QR code. Why? Because we did not display it to the customer earlier, because we provided him with another method of making the payments. Okay, similarly, it happens that in case of prepaid invoices, okay, many a times you must have seen that while shopping, etc., first they tell you the amount and then they tell you that okay, sir, 5,000 is your bill amount, you pay 5,000 rupees, and then the invoice is generated. Okay, if later the invoice is generated, okay, and you had done the payment by scanning the dynamic QR code, then it is not required to show the dynamic QR code on the invoice. But if they did not show you the dynamic QR code, then it is required to be printed on the invoice. Okay, so either they show you earlier and you use it and print it, and you pay the amount, then dynamic QR code is not required on the invoice. But if they have not at all shown you the dynamic QR code, okay, and you have made the payment by any other mode, then dynamic QR code should be present on the invoice. Okay, similarly, when the payment is received in foreign currency, then in that case, dynamic QR code requirement is not there. Okay, similarly, when they have displayed you the dynamic QR code, okay, and in that dynamic QR code, by using the dynamic QR code, you have done the payment. Okay, then in that case, generally there is a order ID or there is an acknowledgement number that is generated while doing the payment. That same number should be mentioned in your invoice. If that is mentioned, then it is considered as if your dynamic QR code requirements have been fulfilled, right? And the last one, if suppose part payment, if you have already done your part payment, okay, maybe by way of advance money or maybe by way of using any voucher, discount coupon, etc., before the dynamic QR code is generated, okay, then in such a case, they will have to provide you a dynamic QR code, and that will be after deducting the discounts. Means after discounts, whatever is the left out amount, only if you scan, then you should be see the balance amount which is payable. Are you clear with this? But your invoice will contain all the details. It will contain your total amount minus so and so amount paid by so and so voucher and minus so and so amount paid by scanning the dynamic QR. Are you clear with this? This was all about your dynamic QR code, and this was all about your tax invoices, debit note and credit.